I'm Gabe Harper. I teach political science here at SCC, and we're very lucky to have Zebrina Looney here with us. She is the head of the St. Charles County chapter of the NAACP, and she's had some very interesting experiences, particularly with dealing with some of the school boards, some of the recent issues in St. Charles County. And so I think y'all are really going to enjoy this talk. Zebrina, please go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning. So my name is Zebrina Looney. I have been in St. Charles County pretty much my entire life. I just had a birthday 4 days ago, so I'm 46 years old, so I've been here for quite a long time. I want to say back here, we raised our family, my husband's over there in the red, and so he came here today as well. We live out in Wentzville, Missouri. We've been out there now for probably about 20 years or so. I actually grew up in Wright City, so it was kind of on the border of Warrenton and St. Charles County. We have 4 children, and all 4 of our children went to school in Wentzville, Missouri. So I have 3 boys and a girl. So I've always been very, very active in their academics, primarily because of the experiences that I had going to school out in this area. So about 4 years ago, I would say, about 4 or 5 years ago, when we started to see a trend of conversations surrounding books and literature and certain topics being questioned within our particular school district, it took, I guess it kind of caught my attention. And so I've always been active in our school board and active within my kids' academics, as I said. And so in going to those school board meetings, I was kind of concerned about the direction in which those conversations was going and the narrative that was being pushed as we continue to enter into those conversations. And so I worked really hard within our community and talking to parents, trying to get a better understanding about those fears and concerns that parents have, because I think that all perspectives matter in that instant. However, when I started to see a targeted group, primarily the protected class, books that were being pulled, when we pulled all the books and looked at the authors, there were a lot of books that were LGBTQ+, and a lot of books that were Black authors. My son at the time, my youngest son, happened to be in, he was in a literature class. This affected him. And it affected his ability to be able to have access to some of these books. And so I, as well as my husband and other community parents and within our area, had gone over to the school board and asked them if they could reconsider the areas in which they were targeting at that time. And that's not something they wanted to do. So they were passing policies that would remove access to a lot of these books. And I talked to my son and I asked him how he felt about that. And he said he was concerned because he was being denied access to what he felt he needed, and I, as his parent, felt like he should have access to better himself or to gain more understanding and knowledge of different cultures, different perspectives in life that would ready him for college and the world. So when they decided to go forward and then remove access from these books, my son and I decided we were going to sue. And so we ended up suing Wentzville School District for the removal of The Bluest Eye, as well as All Boys Aren't Blue. Those 2 books in particular were the books that they targeted the most, but there were about 180 books that they were really looking initially of removing, and the number grew. When we made that decision to go forward and sue the school district for censorship, because essentially that's what that was, the community as a whole, I think, I shouldn't say as a whole, certain groups within the community were very upset about that, of course, but there were also certain groups that were extremely excited and happy that someone was able to stand up and advocate for these books and for this culture. The idea that one person's perspective was enough to remove access for everyone was something that to me threatened not only my children's ability to have access to that literature, but it also was the open door to many other things that are to come, and we've seen that transpire over the last few years. And that is why I made a decision to file a complaint or file a suit against Wentzville School District and for the removal of those books. I'm happy to say that those books were put back within the school system after our lawsuit. They did put the books back, but then we also seen legislatively how they went in and changed the law. And so that is what led me to want to do something bigger and better, grander, right? And so I wanted to find out, how can I speak up for a community of people that may not feel they can speak up for themselves, or to advocate in a way where we are all seen, loved, and protected. And so therefore, I went and sought out organizations within St. Charles County that I could get behind and I could promote and support. And I became affiliated with St. Charles County NAACP as a member. I stayed a member for 2 years, and then after that I ran to be president, and I've been a president of this chapter now for 2 years. And so that is what reason why I motivated me to go out and do something, because of the idea of censorship. And I also related back to my experiences in my own life of going to school as a child in the 80s. Out in Rice City, Missouri, where representation was not something that I saw a lot of. And so the denial or the target of certain groups, to me, was only going to really re-implement those things that I experienced. And as a person who sat through that, who went to school with that, that is something that I wanted to advocate against. I've always appreciated our district out in Wentzville, when my kids were growing up, to have options of opting out of certain programs or certain classes, because that allowed parents, if they did have a certain position, to remove their child from that. But to deny complete access was something that I could not sit back and watch and allow to happen and not speak up and say anything. And so I chose to be that voice. I chose to advocate in that way. In doing so, there was some interesting things that took place. There were some very interesting videos that were, and memes that were created about me and my family all over social media. But the beauty of that for myself is that I'm not so acquainted with being comfortable that that bothered me. And so it did not matter. You know, that was not going to silence me or keep me quiet or stop me from advocating for these families and for other children. I think that the perspective that I come from is, I've talked to many of these kids. I interact with them. My husband has interacted with them. And I hear their concerns and their voices. And I hear the effects that it is having on them. And not only that, but I have my own personal experience and experience within my own household that I saw go forward. And so in order to try to temper the culture censorship or war that was kind of going on within our school systems, I reached out to board members. I met with superintendents. I tried to work on a plan of how we can address these issues in a more sensible way where the community as a whole was still being represented and no one was being targeted. I tried to address the misinformation and address the concerns that were going on, because I myself as a parent, I have 4 children, of course I have concerns as well. But with those concerns, I cannot force that on another family. And so it was really important for me to allow that access and to not be censored in a way where we are only driven down one pathway or one ideology. I feel like that is dangerous, and we've seen that play out in history. That is very, very dangerous. We need to have critical thinking and be able to have those conversations. And the idea of not talking about something and it'll potentially go away has not worked, and if it has, I would love for someone to point that out to me, because I don't know where that's at. I think that there is beauty in all things, and though we may not be able to relate ourselves to all things, we can respect and honor those things, even if we don't necessarily relate to them ourselves. And so it was really important for me to stand up and to speak up when there was something that was going on that I felt was an injustice to our community as a whole. And so that's what I did, and that's what my son so bravely did as he was in his senior year of high school. Stood up and spoke up and stood up for his community. And so I'm very, very, very proud of that. Now, since then, we've seen a lot though. We're continuing to see, I continue to get many, many conversations, phone calls, and concerns about parents throughout St. Charles County. Not just about the censorship of books, but also the censorship of ideas, right? Or lifestyles, or just people being able to exist in their full capacity without the idea of being discriminated against as something being normal. And we as a society, as a culture, have to address that. We have to address our discomfort in that and see what part of that is us and what part of that is something that we need to self-examine and work out. Because we have to represent, our community has to be seen as a whole. I may not be like you, and you may not be like me, but I can still honor you. And when we have laws and policies that go into play that target certain groups, it's very dangerous. And we've seen that play out. We've seen that play out within the last 12 months, honestly. We've seen it get progressively worse.
Right.
And so that is kind of a quick layout of why I do what I do. I have many stories of why it is important to me, and I'll share with you one. I can remember as far back as when I was in elementary school in Rice City, and I had a friend, her name was Amanda Stockton, and Amanda and I, we used to play on our school bus together, and we used to play in elementary playground together. Amanda had a sister, and her sister one day saw us playing and told her mother about it. Her mother beat her. Her mother beat her because she played with me. Amanda came to school the next day with bruises on her arm. I went to hug her and she flinched, and I didn't know why. And so I asked her what was going on, and she said her mother spanked her, whooped her because she was playing with me. And so we concocted this whole plan that we would just only play when her sister wasn't around, so therefore her sister would not be able to tell on her. And so we did, and it worked for about a month, maybe a month and a half, and I guess we got careless in our, being children. And we played on the school playground, and that led over to the bus, and we were playing then, and the next day, Amanda came back to school with bruises again. And I remember telling Amanda, I said, Amanda, maybe we shouldn't be friends. Because I don't want you to get hurt. I will never forget that day. That summer, Amanda moved away. I've never seen her since. But I've never forgot that story. And I've never forgot how that felt. I don't blame Amanda. I partially kind of almost don't blame her parents, only because society kind of puts this whole wall up that creates this thing that we do. I think it's based in, intolerance and ignorance, yes. But we were children, and that left a lasting impression on me. And so growing up, having experiences like that, and I could probably name 10 more, but it doesn't matter, right? At the end of the day, me understanding who I am and how powerful I am came from me reading books. It came from me having access to literature that allowed me to see myself in a different light. It came from me having access to magazines or to joining book clubs when I was in school and reading all of this stuff that was so rich that I did not necessarily have in my community, but gave me hope and insight. And so growing up in that, and then having to face this now, the removal of these type of things, right? It made me think back into that time. That when we remove any access from us seeing and humanizing each other, what are we going to then go to? How are we going to be as human beings? If we can deny that, that's not the world that I want. It's not the world that I want my children to be raised up in. That is not the world that I want my future grandchildren to be raised up in. It's not the world I want my neighbors to have, or my siblings, or nieces or nephews. And so anything that I could do in a way to advocate against that is something that I will gladly do. I do it with pride. I do it with an open ear. I'm here to listen. I listen to people's perspective, but at the end of the day, it's your perspective, and this is my perspective, and I can respect that as long as it does not infringe on my rights to have access to things. And so that was the part for me. I respect every parent's right to control what their child is having access to. I did it. I have 4 children. I did it. But I did not have it removed for the entire community. I did not fight to have it taken away from everyone because I didn't allow my children to have access to it. And so that is why it was important to me. And those experiences that I had looking around at the community that I live in. And I guess also, to be fair, I think it was the fear of what was going to happen next. When we do these things and we push these agendas and we allow these, these areas of censorship to come by, and what happens next? My birthday was Friday. Saturday morning I got up to pack because I had to go to Springfield for 4 days. I decided to take my son to McDonald's. Now, don't judge me for that, I know it's gross, but I did. As I left the McDonald's parking lot, I had a guy that pulled up behind me and started blowing his horn, and initially I thought maybe somebody else was blowing their horn, their horn. It was like an accident or something, and that kind of startled me. So I looked around like, well, what's going on? And it was me he was blowing his horn at. And I can see him in my rearview mirror just kind of screaming at the top of his lungs. So I was like, okay, well, let me just go ahead and go. I couldn't go at first because I was yielding onto ongoing traffic and there were cars coming by. So that's another reason why I was kind of like, why did he blow his horn at me? I didn't understand that. So when my lane cleared and I could go ahead and go, I drove off. As I drove off, he drove past me, almost hit me, driving his car reckless. He slowed down just enough to call me the N-word 3 times. And I'm just like, and my son was in the back seat and his girlfriend was in the back seat and she was startled. And I looked at my son and he was angry. I said, don't be angry. Don't be angry. I said, in situations like this, we'll use our resources, right? We'll also use our emotional intelligence, right? This is part of the things that what happens when you start censoring certain ideas and certain people's experiences. People get stuck in a bubble. And we all can be guilty of that. I have been guilty of that. And so as he did that, and I talked to my son about it, I said, well, just file a police report, because it was reckless driving. And we'll move on. You own your day. You own your day. You know what this world is. We also know what we want it to be. And so while I acknowledge what this world is, I also acknowledge what I want it to be. And it is my responsibility to stay focused on that. And the world that I want to see is a world where we all love and respect and honor each other. That is the world that I want to see, and that is the world I will continue to advocate for and fight for.
Thank you very much.
But it was a lot, sorry.
We wanted to open the floor up to questions here. I have one to start with.
Yeah.
This is kind of a 2-part question. What reasons were given, like when they censored these books, what reasons were given? And the second part of that question is a little tricky. Do you think that was actually the reason? Do you know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah.
So the reason that was given was that they felt like children were being exposed to sexual content at a very young age, and that it was, these books were also indoctrinating their children. They also gave the reason that they should have those conversations as opposed to the teachers, right, having those conversations. And your second question again?
Well, it's just like, so they claim there's sexually explicit content,
Yes.
stuff children should not be learning at school with discussing with
Correct.
their parents, and that was, you think that was probably the genuine reason behind it?
So, I'm not going to tell someone what their concerns are, right? So I'm going to say that if they felt like that was their concerns, then I'm going to say, okay, that was their concerns. So I feel like their concerns on a larger scale was misguided and motivated by fear to cause for it to be, to push a certain agenda. Yes, because the reality is this. The book in particular, The Bluest Eye, they said that book was sexually explicit. and that it was promoting pornography. The reason why I take personal issue is that because the paragraph in the book that they were talking about was actually over someone who was being raped. Mm-hmm. You cannot conflate rape with porn. In that way, in a way that the author had actually said it. They said that it was glorifying it. I don't know, where do we glorify something like that? And so, but do I think that they were using that to push forward the agenda of removing these books because of, we know these different groups like Moms for Liberty and so on and so forth. Most of the people, and I cannot think of one person, and when we specifically asked them, had you read this book so you can get full contextual understanding of what was going on? The answer was no. They hadn't read it. And so how do you then make a decision of what the context of this was if you have not even taken the time to read the book? I take issue with the idea of conflating the description of this young girl's experience in this book with it being sexual explicit porn. Having myself been a victim of rape, that was offensive to me. And so to sit back and so to use this, to build this momentum, to cause parents to have this fear, to sway them, is dangerous. It's dangerous, and it also perpetuates women and men, quite honestly, who go through that to silence. And so that was the reasoning. Do I think that they buy into it? I think that Jim Jones really happened. I think that you have people that really do believe in certain ideas that are pushed, and regardless of what they believe. And when you try to produce a factual or anything to counter, they make a choice to continue on in that belief system regardless. So I think they believe it. I think they believe it as much as I believe it. I just stand on a different side of it. Yeah.
And Paul's got a microphone over there. Y'all have questions here, I'm sure. Be brave.
Yeah, be brave. It's quite all right, you guys. No? Well, I will do this. I'm going to have, Don, if you can, I'm going to have you, I know that you were there for some of this, the book removal and some of those conversations. If I can have you, if you don't mind, kind of give your account of that experience for yourself as well, briefly.
As far as
the book removals and the dialogue that was expressed around that.
okay.
Yeah, just briefly, if you could just kind of give your reasoning or your experience with that.
So, can you hear? Okay. So, for me, I always looked at the attack on the books and, the critical race theory, boogeyman, and things of that nature as part of a much broader scale. Because if you look back, and you can use your Googles and check these kinds of things out, but even as early as the late 70s and early 80s, there was attack on access to higher education, and that kind of trickled down into public education. After the desegregation programs and things of that nature, through most of that time, education was like the equalizer, right? It didn't matter where your family started at or anything. If you got a good education, you were promised a good job, you get a good home, you could live the American dream. Well, that dream started to get overcrowded, right? So then they started building subdivisions everywhere, people selling land, more houses and things going up. So anyway, all of that, education is part of that building block in there to me, to try to eliminate what we have as a middle class, right? And so in order for you to lose faith in the public education system, it was necessary for them to demonize the content in those books, demonize what's going on at some of these universities, high schools. So it goes into the libraries, you hear them talking about what teachers are saying and how teachers are doing things, some of the books and things they mentioned. She mentioned the alleged sexual content, explicit nature of some of those books. But a lot of that information, if you don't get that at a high school level, you won't be able to compete once you get to college, because those things are like just common part of English lit programs and things of that nature. So throughout that process, that was kind of the approach that I was taking. Like, y'all, this is about something bigger. It's not really about the books, right? It's not really about any of these things that they're telling you about on a grander scale. You know, they're just trying to eliminate that access to what we all call the American dream.
Yeah. And I'll say this just to add to that. Make no mistake, I was very much, and I've always very much been in support of an opting out and not having access if that family does not want that. But that was not something that was even acceptable to them. It was all or nothing. And when you have a policy or an institution that will give you, it's either all or nothing, you leave the in-between out. And so you also put an eye or a target on the groups that you are essentially going after as far as those books are concerned. And so, you know, when they did the big book pool, when the law came into effect and they did the big pool from our district out in Winslow in particular, they were removing books like black baseball players, or, you know, even like with the civil rights movements, if there were LGBTQ plus within the civil rights movements, they were removing these types of books. You know, the extent to where it went, I don't think that they considered that. How far, if they were to put this law into place, how far that actually extends and what all it covers. And so that's why it became very, very dangerous. And not only did it brought up the topic of how do we have conversations about gender? How do we have conversations about, you know, race? How do we have those conversations and navigate that within the classroom now? And when that came about, they said, well, you don't. We'll put this target out. You know, we'll remove this. We'll start removing books, and we'll have all this content around this. But we don't want you to talk about it, because if you talk about it, educators, you may lose your job. After we've made this thing a big spectacle, after we've brought all the attention to this, now we don't want you to have conversations about it. We want you to just be quiet. But with that, I would tell you, I sit on a committee that has, every quarter we'll do our numbers with hate crimes and things in the state of Missouri. It has doubled. It is getting worse. We're seeing that more against the Jewish community, more against the Black community, more against the LGBTQ plus community. We're seeing that with this rhetoric, with this type of attention and conversation that we're having, that started from books, right? Because we're all just wanting to protect kids. Where are we protecting them now? Now that we've seen an increase in those conversations that are not negative, now that we've seen an increase in how they've trickled down, where is the protecting of them now? When they can't even have access. If I didn't have access as a child to literature or books, I mean, quite honestly, I didn't get it from school. We didn't have classes like that, right? So if I didn't have access from literature for me to read about history, I would not know. I would not be aware of it. And so what is the bigger picture and the bigger goal? I am 100% for parents having the right to protect their children. I am not for that parent having the right to speak for mine. I'm capable. I'm fully capable to speak for my child and to say what my child can and cannot have access to. And I think it is unfair if someone's concerns overrules mine. That is unfair to me, it is unfair to the community. It is unfair to all the students that have access to be around other people who may not look like you, to get out of that bubble. I grew up in an area where it was very much a bubble, and you don't have those experiences. You're not around other people who may not look like you on a scale to where it really is efficient. I mean, my classrooms, there was, you know, I'd never had a classroom where I had a teacher that was a person of color. My entire life. Oh, good morning.
Oh, I did see, we do have a question back here in the back.
Yes.
I think you touched on this briefly, but if you had a parent saying it's your right to have these books, but also a parent saying it's my right also for my child not to read these books in class, what solutions would you offer them?
So within our district, we actually had where you could opt not allow. I use that a lot. I have 4 kids, like I said, and so when there was something that was going on within my children's school that I did not want them to participate in, I simply opted out. I opted out of the form of them participating in whatever, if they had an assembly that I didn't want, and I've done this. I said, no, my child could not go. If there's a book or something that they want, I said, well, no, I don't want my child having access to this. That was for me in my household. And that's what I did for me in my household. I do not think it is fair for me to do that for yours or anyone else's. I think that everyone should have the right to make that choice for themselves, but they should have access to those choices. Yes, thank you so much for that question.
I have a comment and a question that go together. My comment is that a lot of teachers for me were a safe space in high school, being gay, and a lot of books obviously helped me through that as well, but banning books is kind of just the start. And once you take those books away and the teachers are no longer allowed to talk about them, those spaces become less safe for people that are seeking them out. And I will always remember all of those teachers that have helped me out. But my question was, I'm not very familiar with the Wentzville lawsuit. How did the teachers kind of react to that? Were you met with pushback from any of that, or was it mainly support?
It was primarily all support. Honestly, I not only did we get support with the teachers from the teachers with that process, but the teachers who did support us were then targeted as well. They were targeted. Their medias were searched. They were put out smear videos on them. There was a whole pack that was started in order to target them, as well as anyone who spoke up in objection to what was going on. So yeah, that's kind of how that went. Of course, now of course, with the law being what it is, that also prohibited them even more. And I think maybe if you don't mind, if I can have Heather kind of speak to a little bit of that. Heather's with Missouri Equity in Education, and so her organization has been working for a very, very long time and advocating for education equity within education.
First, I apologize for my tardiness. At least now Zebrina can take back to my board the fact that I need an assistant desperately. Yes, so I founded the Missouri Equity Education Partnership in response to the new wave of the type of laws that would basically limit our ability to connect with one another according to our culture, etc. And so when we look at the book bans that started to happen, in Wentzville, etc., the issue is, and what MOEP wanted to do, is that we know that educators are in a difficult position because they have to remain politically neutral. And so as a former English teacher myself, I was able to kind of be a voice to say, well, wait a minute, this isn't how you teach. This isn't what you do. Like, I could not imagine not being able to talk to a student of mine about an area of concern that they may have, even if that area of concern is about their changing identity or them coming into their identity. And so I think that a lot of teachers ended up being very, very concerned about what this would mean for their teaching practice, what it would mean for their classroom environment. But then, more than that, like what could be legal repercussions that came out of it. The downside is that a lot of school districts have not enacted book bans, but we still have effective book bans because there are teachers who will regulate themselves to the point and take things, self-censor, because they don't know what the backlash would be like. As Zebrina talked about, in certain school districts, we had parents releasing videos of teachers in their classroom, or a picture of a worksheet, posting it on social media in order to get people outraged. And so it became dangerous. And that's the really sad part. Teaching shouldn't be a blood sport. And for some teachers, it's become very dangerous. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Was there any other questions anyone had?
I just have a comment about your lawsuit. I was a sophomore in the Wentzville School District when you sued the school, and I remember prior to the lawsuit even coming into fruition, there was frustration within my classrooms about the beginning of the book ban, because in my district specifically, I can speak on the ignorance that has continued to grow in our area, and as a person of color, it was just so disappointing. Like, as soon as I started high school, there was so much more confidence to speak in such a negative and bigoted way about people of color and people belonging to the LGBTQ+ community. So I can speak on my personal experience and say that seeing my school, such a large entity in my head, be confronted in such a way was so inspiring. And my sophomore year was the first year that I started youth in government and became a student advocate. And I can say that seeing that lawsuit was truly inspiring and taught me that I have a voice and that I can prevent things like this from happening. So I just feel like it was so important to know that you could speak on such a topic, and I definitely think that it helped a lot in keeping our students in their place. I don't know how to say this, but it just really did, help the entire school to know that book banning wasn't the right way to go about it, that maybe their parents did not know or weren't educated enough to know what was right to keep in schools. And that's the most important part. Like, a lot of these students come to school and basically say exactly what they're hearing at home, and that's where we're kind of losing the education in it. Like, if parents can dictate everything that is taught in schools, it's just going to turn into an echo chamber. And we're keeping our schools a place of education rather than an echo chamber that parents are allowed to control.
Absolutely. I have to applaud you on the future leaders. Come on, that was really good. Thank you so much for that.
I think you pointed out something very important. One of the things is that one of the arguments is that by exposing kids to these ideas, we're indoctrinating. Educators are indoctrinating. The definition of indoctrination is to present one viewpoint and expect it to be accepted uncritically. When we expose kids to multiple viewpoints and we allow them to think through it, think critically about it, that is actually the opposite of indoctrination. One of the things that you also have to realize is that this is an old playbook. It's repackaged. But this is the same playbook that we saw in the 1800s, that we saw through, the pre-Revolutionary War, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, Civil Rights. Like, these are the same playbooks. One of the biggest things that they've always tried to do is to limit access to information. That's number one, but then number two, to use our systems in order to ensure that certain groups, specific groups, were disadvantaged and unable to progress. And so we have moved into a time when there's more individuals who are on board with specific groups being able to progress, to move forward, et cetera, in our society, and it's a way to stop that. And so we've always utilized education in that way. If you want to know, like, why specific school districts are set up the way that they are, or why there's concentrated areas of poverty, or why any of those things are happening, the first place you have to start a lot of times is with racism. But then the next thing is to understand that this is part of a bigger plan that has always been a theme in our country. And it's going to be leaders like you all that begin to, continue the process of breaking that hold over our educational systems and making sure that our educational systems work for everyone.
Absolutely. And I think, as I kind of touched on a little bit earlier, you have to realize that the repercussions of acts like this cannot be compartmentalized. They're not just going to stay in this one area. Again, we've seen that as we look at the numbers of different discrimination and hate crimes that are being done around the state of Missouri and the protected groups. If you're not going to keep this, the repercussions of this is not going to stay right here. You're going to see that spread all over. And that's not good for our community, it's not good for our state, it's not good for anybody. And so it's very important. I mean, I think it's important to have these conversations, but I also think it's important to understand when having these conversations. We all have different perspectives, so how can we reach the middle? What can we do where my rights are not infringed upon and neither is yours or the person who may object to it? And so to her question in the back, like, what is the options? That should have been the conversation. To maybe more go in and maybe redefine, how do we make sure and ensure that if I as a parent say I want to opt out, how can we make sure that is ironclad? Where I can have my individual rights. But instead going and removing access for all, that's dangerous. And again, we've seen that. Since that happened, we've seen more things come down the pipeline. And as I said several years ago, when this happened, I said, my fear is, and what I'm seeing is that this is not going to be the end. We're only at the beginning. And then we've seen this play out time and time again, and we continue to see it. We saw that with the removal of books, and then what came next? The removal of classes. That came next. And from the removal of classes, it was a conversation about bathrooms. So what is next? At what point are we going to get a hold of this? Again, you're not going to compartmentalize the repercussions of these type of acts. And so we have to be aware of that. This is where we are today. How can we build a world where we are respectful and honor each other? Where every individual can stand up in their full capacity and not have to shrink themselves or be less than or act less than because of someone else. Everybody should have that right. Everybody is equally important to that. And so when you remove access like this, when you're censored in this type of way, it is not going to stay here. It's not going to be the only area. We've seen that play out time and time again, and it's going to get worse if we don't, as a community, as a society, say, okay, we've had enough of this. We've had enough. And we're not going to allow you to use us as puppets in your game. I asked the parents who were doing this, how often have you all talked to those students? And I don't mean the ones that you sat at home and wrote speeches for. I mean like the students that are within these schools. Have you talked to them? Because when we listen to them, it's like they heard a story from someone who told them a story, from someone who told them about a situation. Well, did you see it? Or are you just carrying along a story that someone told you? So are you communicating with the students whose lives are being affected? Are you talking to them? Are you echoing their concerns? Is this what they want, or is this what you want? This is their education. Last year, when 3 years ago when this happened, I held a meeting for parents and students around St. Charles County. We had over 200, was it Francis Howard's when that was? We had over 200 community members show up. They weren't happy. What they felt was powerless though, because more times than often, we do not have access to the information of what we can do to advocate for ourselves, and so we feel powerless. We sit back and we don't say anything, right? And then we just shrink ourselves. And so empowering parents, empowering community members with those tools and how to advocate for themselves is why I then went from that advocacy and suing for the books to going and joining the NAACP, so that we can give that type of information to the community. And MOEP has been doing this for years. For years, they have held workshops. They have held, they have forums. They continue to do the work across the states, not just here in St. Charles County, but across the entire, beyond the state of Missouri, actually. And we pat you on the back a little bit, but they've been doing this work. And when book bans when they tried to ban the books, went into play, they then were donating these books so that people could have access to them. Do you know what we learned, that my husband actually told me about, and I don't know why I didn't realize this, because it was in Warren County. You know Warren County does not have a public library? Lincoln County. Lincoln County, I apologize. Not have a public library, I know, it's still bad. And so saying that they can go to the nearest library to get access to this everybody cannot go to the nearest library. And then look what they've done to the libraries. It didn't stay within the schools. It continued to go. They said, well, you know what, you don't want we don't want them in our schools, we're taxpayers. Well, so is everyone else whose family does not look like yours. They're taxpayers as well. And they matter as well. Go to the library and get them. Well, now they've gone to the libraries. Libraries have to have a totally different catalog, totally different area. What's next? Again, you're not going to compartmentalize the repercussions of this. And that's why it's important to have those conversations and speak up about it. If you see something, do something. And if you can't do anything, maybe echo it to somebody to speak on it, so somebody who can, or who's in that position who can do something and stand in your seat to do something for you.
I actually want to say that, yeah, you always can do something. That really is the reality. There are a lot of people who try to convince you like one of the strategies is just to throw everything at the wall so that you're so overwhelmed that you shut down. But what I always tell people is that each and every one of you have a role to play. You have to figure out what it is, because I can't tell you how many people right now we have with Mo Week doing advocacy work that they approached me and we're like, I don't know what to do. I just know I need to do something. Well, let's figure out what that is. You know, every advocate does not do what we do. So getting up, speaking in front of people, going out, shaking hands, all that stuff, that's not what every advocate does. There is one person in my organization that has had a significant impact on the school board process, and he does it all from behind his computer. Because if you go to our C4, MissouriEquityAction.com website, you will be able to look up scorecards. And when you look at those scorecards, you can see who ran in specific districts and what their positions were as far as equity is concerned, okay? The person that runs that, he does not get up and make speeches, but last year, over 5,000 people accessed that. Excuse me, I guess this year. Over 5,000 people accessed that across the state to find out, do my school board candidates align with my values? That's a huge impact. And so each of you has the ability to. Some of you are studying, communication, some of you are studying writing, some of you are studying whatever. But whatever you're studying, there's a role for you. And so, yeah, you can have an impact. You're important. Your voice is important. But that's why you also have to consider the reason why they're making such a concerted effort to squelch your voice, to make sure that you can't step up, to make sure that you can't speak out.
Are there any students here from Francis Howell? Because was it last year that was the big brouhaha? Was it last year? Anyone want to comment about what went on last year? Do you have a comment there? Okay.
I live in Francis Howell. It's interesting. I had the opportunity to meet with the board president in April. And after a 45-minute conversation in which he argued that the reason why they removed the standards was because they disagreed with, well, part of it, they disagreed with the definition of racism as being systemic. I looked at him, and my last words to him were, my number one goal is to make sure that this is your only term. Because it was just very obvious that the goal is to cause harm.
Yeah, I was actually, I went to Francis Howell North and all that.
Oh, you probably know my daughter then.
Yeah. Oh, I graduated like a long time ago.
Oh, then you don't know my daughter.
Well, not that long ago, but yeah, I graduated like 6 years ago. But my two younger sisters both go to, one goes to Becky David now, and one goes to Cornwall.
Mm-hmm.
And, I live with them and my mom. So yeah, last year when, I think it was last school year kind of, they were talking about critical race theory and getting rid of classes and different things like that. So my mom actually got a little bit more involved, and one of my sister's teachers was actually like very involved. So they both were involved, and that kind of got me involved as well. And I was a little curious, what did that look like for you guys? Like, were you guys involved in that? What was your, how was activism for that for you guys?
Oh yeah, we were very involved. And so we worked with a couple of other organizations that have an interest in Francis Howell, and like Zebrina said, we helped to organize this community meeting that had like over 200 people at it, where they talked about like, what are the things that you want to do? What are the priorities for you in the district? We helped students, just guided them as they looked at how they could use their voice. And so that included going to school board meetings and speaking out. It also included planning a walkout that they decided to plan across the 3 high schools. What else?
Our organization worked with student leaders. It was very important for us to make sure that the students were guiding their futures, their education.
Yeah.
And so we worked with the student leaders within each of the high schools to ensure that whatever they wanted to do was, they knew the policies around it so that they would protect themselves and be safe. That was number one. As far as anything else, I had a conversation, I met with the board. I met with their Title VI holder, Francis Howell. I met with several parents within Francis Howell, and it was interesting, and
To say the least.
it was very interesting. I did tell them that it would be my #1 job if they move forward in targeting groups that are any queer groups or Black, LGBT, any groups. I don't care if it was low-income groups. I don't care what it was. If you continue to target groups of children in your district, I'm going to make it my business to make sure you make national news. Because we cannot continue to allow children, young people, to be harmed in that way. It is dangerous. The years it takes the mental abuse is violent. And I despise it. And so I met with several of them. I met with students. I offered support in any way that we could with students. But again, it was essential that students led their future. I invited speakers to come out, and ACLU came out and did a parent information to let them know what legally what their rights were. Because I think people don't know. You have rights. Your rights don't fall off you when you walk into that school building.
Yeah.
And parents have rights. And I think that we assume that everyone knows what those rights are, and the reality is that we do not. Everybody does not know. I talked to a mother a few weeks ago, and I've told this story before, but a few weeks ago, who moved here a year and a half ago. She's in Wentzville School District. Her daughter was struggling, had an IEP, Wentzville, for whatever reason, it did not transfer over. But she went to the school for help and told them her daughter was struggling. She showed me emails from the school administrators that it essentially let her down. Her daughter became very, very depressed, had high anxiety. This is over the course of a year and a half. They went on spring break. Spring break was back in, it's supposed to go back to school. Mom calls home and says, hey, why aren't you at school? Because her daughter had so much anxiety, she did not want to go back to the school because of how she was felt and treated and felt like she wasn't getting any help. Daughter tells mom, okay, I'll go to school. She hung the phone up, went into her mother's room, grabbed a gun, and shot herself in the head. 17 years old. 17 years old. This mom showed me about 30 emails of her reaching out to this school for help. One of the emails said that I'm going to remove her from school, and the email said, no, we have another option for you. I said, Mom, did you know that was not their choice? You don't have to ask permission for that? She said, I didn't know. I did not know. These things, instead of focusing, right, on things like trying to censor books and censor these conversations, these young kids, these people, and we're trying to get rid of social emotional learning. Lives are being affected. This baby was 17. Can you imagine? I can't imagine. And now she has to live with this. I'm sure there were other elements that went on, but I'll tell you what, that didn't help. This didn't help that mom went to the school and did not have, and was not given proper information. She's now suing them. Well, she has a lawyer too, so hopefully she does, right? Because that is negligent. They should have been given the proper information. The amount of parents I talk to and have conversations with that don't have the proper information of how to handle situations that are going on. It is a conversation I have regularly, all of the time. So parents need to understand their rights. Students need to understand their rights. But your rights should not infringe upon someone else to do what it should not. And there are consequences for things like this. When we're not focused over here, but we're so focused over here, we're dropping the bag over here though. Like we need to, does our school system need help? Absolutely. Does our teachers need help? Absolutely. We need to get to that. I'm sorry. I went on a whole ramble. That conversation with mom, that really, that hurts to sit across from her.
It hurts.
To have that.
It hurts to hear. Yeah.
So go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, I have two things, but I was gonna say, I was at Francis House Central and I had a friend who helped plan the walkout, and the teachers wrote our names down and told us that we would be in really big trouble if we participated in it, and then they decided not to because so many kids participated in it.
Well, that's also because she was on the phone
Yeah.
with everybody I dare you. I dare you to suspend these kids because it's their First Amendment right.
I talked to your superintendent after that when
Yeah.
I started getting the phone calls.
Yeah.
I knew there was stuff going on behind the scenes, so I just wanted to say I'm really thankful for that it didn't go on people's records for things that should have been talked about. And then I wanted to say for the book banning and censorship and stuff, I personally wouldn't have had access to go to the library when I was younger to go read the books that I wanted to read, and the books that I needed to read weren't things that my parents would want me to read, not because they were inappropriate, just because of their views. And to not have access to the books would be super frustrating. So I only could read them when I was at school. I couldn't read them at home for risk of being in trouble or being grounded or other things. I just wanted to say people sometimes have the thought that, the way that you should if your parents don't want you to read it, you can just look it up on the internet or go to the library, but the internet isn't really a safe place to get access to those ideas and things. And I just wanted to know, what age do you think kids should be allowed to, because a lot of people say, elementary school is too young and middle school is a weird spot, but by high school I feel like kids should be able to read books that they want to. Obviously that's up to the parents' discretion, but what age do you think schools should stop implementing super big wipes of books? Because I know they have to censor books in elementary schools, but what are your thoughts on middle school, high school kind of?
So as a former English teacher, one of the things that we have to remember is that when someone has a degree in library science, when someone has a degree in English language arts and education, we are looking at, when we say what books should be available to whom, we're looking at reading levels, we're looking at the themes, are they age appropriate themes, we're looking at the maturity level of the readers, the complexity of the words, all of these different elements go into saying, hey, this book belongs at this level versus that level. And so as an English teacher, one of the things that I did is that there were things that my ninth graders, I would read with my ninth graders, that I wouldn't read with my seniors, and vice versa. Because at that age, 14 years old versus 18 years old, whoa, the amount of brain development that happens, maturity, experiences, all of this stuff that happens in between those ages, there's just things that aren't going to be appropriate. And so that's the reason why it has always been really important for parents to work with teachers in order to say, hey, do you think this book is, appropriate for my child? Now, the other thing that I always wanted to do as an English teacher is to encourage the love of reading. And so there were some kids, voracious amounts of reading. So the books that I might recommend to them might have been more okay, if this is something that you enjoy, or this is something that you identify with, or, this is something that I found this book and now I want to, go and read more on this whole series. then that's something that we encouraged you to do. So that's a long way of saying that it's more complex. Like when people say they are letting elementary school elementary school students read, 50 Shades of Grey. That's just not true. That's just not true. What they are doing is that they leave out information. There's this really great TED Talk called The Danger of the Single Story by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And in that, she talks about the fact that too many people, especially when we have these types of discussions, start the story with secondly. So they don't start it with this piece of information, they start it here so that they can make the view look a lot differently. And when we're engaging in these conversations around book bans, that's what a lot of them are doing. So they might say, oh, you know what? They had this book in a library that kids had access to. Well, no, let's talk more about that. Because was that library in a school for kids, grades K through 8? Then yeah, there's gonna be an 8th grade level book that a 4th grader has no business reading, but there's also going to be a professional librarian there to tell that child that's above your level. So at a certain point, I think that kids should have book choice, but I think it should be guided book choice. And then, like you said, by the time you get into 15, 16, 17 years old, you know what you want to read, and you know what you're capable of reading. And if there's something that your parents are like, we really don't want you exposed to that, then they can call the library and say, hey, my kid can't check out these books. My kid can't check out books that have this reading level or these mature themes. So that's my answer, yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. But before we go, and remember my students, please make sure you're signed in on this tablet here.
So I went to Winston North, but I currently work at Becky David Elementary, and I have some students who, they do have a lot of questions for me, and I don't exactly know how to answer them when it comes to what they can read in the library, because their teachers are telling them they have to read some things, but they are picking out books about their race or about the society today, and they don't know if they can or not. Is there anything that would help for them to push in the right direction they could say?
So when I was trying to help kids with choosing the books that I like, one of the first things is that you look at, like, what is the book rated? Because even if you look up on Amazon, it will tell you, oh, this book is for, 8 and above, or this book is for 8 to 12, okay? So that is kind of number one, but then number two, I always advise just basically on what type of books, like asking the kid, what type of books do you like? Like, what's your favorite book? And then going from there to see, are there similar books that are in that vein? So, like for instance, I love dystopian novels. So Ender's Game is one of my very favorite books. From there, I came across that because of The Hobbit, etc. So you end up with dystopian books or science fiction, fantasy type books. If they are interested in specific subjects, then you can look up and say, oh, well, these are books that are similar about these particular subjects. But always kind of look to see, are there any notes in their file that, from a parent that says, I don't want them reading books about, then, go from there. But pretty much what you're looking at is it within their age group and is it within their interest level? Because I'm not going to give, I'm not going to give To Kill a Mockingbird to anyone. I'm not going to give How to Be an Anti-Racist, the adult version, to an 8-year-old. So, yeah.
And we're about out of time here, but I want to thank our two guests for showing up. This has really been great. Give me another round of applause, please.